As the 90s rolled on, the music scene underwent a seismic shift with the explosion of grunge. Bon Jovi faced challenges in adapting to this new landscape, as their signature rock anthems faced competition from the raw and introspective sounds of bands like Nirvana and Pearl Jam. But of all the big-head hard rock bands of the 80s, Bon Jovi were perhaps best poised to navigate these shifts, given their appeal transcended just the rock crowd, and since 1986 had found favour in the mainstream. Bon Jovi adapted its look and its sound, heading back into the studio in Vancouver to work on their '92 album, Keep the Faith. Years later, John would say,
"When we got back together in a room in Vancouver, we closed the door and ignored what had happened to our genre of music. We'd been kicked in the teeth by Nirvana, but we didn't pay attention to that. We got rid of the cliches, wrote some socially conscious lyrics, and got a haircut. I didn't do a grunge thing. But I knew I couldn't rewrite Living on a Prayer again, so I didn't try. And it paid off."
Pay off it did. While the album failed to match the commercial heights of Slippery When Wet or New Jersey, it debuted at number 5 in the US, where it would go double platinum, and peaked at number 1 in the UK and number 1 in Australia, boasting one top 10 hit in Bed of Roses. Bon Jovi had managed to change their look and sound just enough to appease both their existing fans and stay relevant in the face of disruptive changes to the musical landscape that claimed the scalp of so many of their 1980s hard-rocking peers. Motley Crue, meanwhile, also cut their hair shorter, brought in scream vocalist John Corabi to replace Vince, and recorded their self-titled album, a more soulful, bluesy, and lyrically a socially conscious album by the Crue standards, exploring themes like child molestation and 1992's race riots in LA. While a departure from the usual sound, one that divides many Crue fans, those on one side of the divide think it's their best work, at least musically. Commercially though, despite hitting number 7 on the Billboard chart, it only ever went gold in the US, and was a mere shadow of its predecessor Dr. Feelgood, which did 12 times better in terms of album sales in the United States. Much had changed in the preceding 5 years, and Motley Crue were hanging on to their career by the skin of their teeth. In the coming decades, both bands would experience a roller coaster of highs and lows, both in the band members' professional and personal lives. Both bands endured significant lineup changes, with Vince Neil returning to Motley Crue in 1997, but Tommy Lee leaving in 1999 to do his own thing. More recently, the ailing Mick Mars, whose spinal degeneration disease has made touring too difficult, has also stepped away from the band, sparking a war of words with Motley Crue and legal battles over touring royalties. He has been replaced by Marilyn Manson guitarist John Five. Offstage, it's Tommy Lee who's courted controversy, serving a 4-month jail sentence in 1998 for the spousal abuse of his now ex-wife Pamela Anderson. This was on the back of a sex tape of the pair having been stolen, leaked, and widely distributed globally in 1996, something that shook Anderson to her core and significantly hurt her career prospects. In Bon Jovi's camp, bassist Alec John Such left the band in 1994. More recently, original guitarist Richie Sambora left in 2013 to pursue his solo career. However, as of May 2023, rumors are circulating of his return to the band, as John Bon Jovi, now 61, struggles to repair his ailing voice. Sadly, in June of 2022, Alec John Such succumbed to a heart attack. He was 70. Bon Jovi would continue to water down their hard rock sound and release more one-times platinum-selling albums in the US, such as 94's These Days and 2000's Crush, along with several hit singles, but they'd never come close to matching their 80s heroics. As of 2023, it's been 13 years since Bon Jovi last went platinum, with 2010's Greatest Hits album reaching the milestone. Their last original studio album, To Go the Distance, was 2007's Lost Highway. Having said that, the nature of the music industry has also shifted significantly since then, with digital downloads and streaming becoming the predominant way that people listen to music today. Bands simply aren't going platinum like they used to. The success of a band today rests on its ability to tour and pack out large venues. At the turn of the millennium, Motley Crue was dead in the water, but their career was to be revived, thanks to a little biography by Neil Strauss called The Dirt, detailing all of the sordid exploits of Motley Crue during the 1980s. Released in 2001, its wild success led to the return of Tommy Lee to the fold, with the Red, White and Crue compilation album released shortly thereafter, going platinum in the US and being followed by the sellout Carnival of Sins World Tour. Since the mid to late 2000s, the 80s hard rock and metal bands have enjoyed a resurgence, with multiple generations of fans turning up to see these 80s hard rock heroes suit up and perform shows unlike anything most contemporary rock acts attempt today. The multi-generational appeal has in fact led to bands like Motley Crue playing to larger audiences than ever before. The Dirt book was so successful that it was optioned by Netflix for a movie, and that option was taken advantage of when the movie was released in 2019. Featuring the likes of Pete Davidson and Machine Gun Kelly, it celebrated Motley Crue's wild career and exposed them to new audiences. Despite having embarked on a so-called farewell tour in 2015 and signed a contract stipulating that they'd never get back together, the success of the film was followed by a reunion shortly thereafter, and the band's stadium tour. Initially plagued with delays due to the coronavirus pandemic, the stadium tour has seen the band tour with Def Leppard and Poison and pack out 40,000-seat stadiums. The tour, having been wildly successful across the states, is now being taken across the globe. Interestingly, Bon Jovi's mainstream appeal, which once served them, might now be working against them. The band's last big tour, This House Is Not For Sale, which ran from 2017 to 2019, saw them playing audiences in cities of around 10 to 15,000 people. Still commendable arena shows for a band that's been around for 4 decades, but admittedly, much smaller than what Motley Crue's doing on their stadium tour. Perhaps some of this might be owing to the fact that Motley Crue's attitude, image, and now very well publicized story is more compelling to younger generations of fans than Bon Jovi's, which young fans are unlikely to distinguish from the likes of Bruce Springsteen and even Bryan Adams. The average age of a Bon Jovi concert patron nowadays is typically older than that at a Motley Crue show, where you're just as likely to see teenagers, 20 and 30-somethings banging their heads as you are to find 40, 50 and even 60-year-olds. But both bands, facing insurmountable odds, have stood the test of time. As Nikki Sixx put it when responding to a tweet from a fan asking whether the bassist would consider a collaboration with Bon Jovi in 2019.
John's still around. The music stood the test of time. Good for him and his band.
When all was said and done, Bon Jovi would release 15 studio albums and go on to sell 130 million albums worldwide, whereas Motley Crue would release 9 studio albums and go on to sell 100 million albums, doing so with a much more hard-rocking and less watered-down sound than Bon Jovi. But above all, they've left us with stories that have stood the test of time. Thus concludes Season 3 of Battle on the Bands on Motley Crue versus Bon Jovi. If you enjoyed this season, take a moment to like, share, subscribe, or share it with a friend, or do all of the above. Remember, you can find us on socials, on Twitter at BattleBandsPod and Instagram at BattleBandsPod. And if you'd like to sign up to our mailing list, you can do so over at battleofthebandspod.com and get notified every time we drop a new season. Those quotes you heard throughout this season were AI-generated recreations of words that were said on the record or rough estimations of what was said. Of course, we don't know exactly what was said, but we can piece it together to the best of our abilities based on what we've read in publications across the interwebs. My name is Steve Glaveski. I researched, wrote, narrated, and produced Battle of the Bands, and I hope you've enjoyed this season. Until next time, keep those headphones in and those horns up.